He thought she died 7 years ago. But when twin girls show up, crying at his gate begging for help, the billionaire recognizes their eyes and realizes the love of his life might still be alive. What he uncovers next will shatter everything he believed, and nothing, not even the truth, is ready for what comes next. Dear friend, what you're about to experience is not just a story. It's a deeply human journey about lost resilience and the quiet, unexpected ways love finds us when we need it most. If this is your first time here, I invite you to drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing your voice. And if you're someone who believes in second chances and the hidden strength of ordinary people, and in stories that stay with you long after they end, consider subscribing and tapping the bell icon. We share moments that matter. Thank you for being part of this one. Now let's begin. The rain fell like a slow collapse of the sky, thick, heavy, relentless. Thunder cracked the night open. And inside the sprawling old estate on the outskirts of Savannah, Georgia, Nathaniel Cross sat perfectly still in a worn leather chair, his silhouette flickering in the dim glow of the fireplace. For 7 years, this house had been silent. No music, no laughter, just shadows and the memory of Clara Whitmore, the woman he'd loved and buried. Or so he believed. He held a glass of bourbon in one hand untouched. His other hand rested on the closed lid of a baby grand piano. It hadn't been opened since the day she died. There were nights like this one when he almost heard her laughter in the walls. Nights when the wind howled so mournfully it felt like the mansion itself grieved with him. Nathaniel wasn't a man who cried, not anymore, not after that. But fate, it seems, doesn't knock politely. It pounds, it roars, it arrives soaked and shaking just beyond the iron gates at the edge of the drive. The buzz of the intercom cut through his silence. "Sir," came the voice of James, the head of security. "There are 2 children at the gate. Young girls. No adults. They're asking for help." Nathaniel blinked, confused. "Children. Out there now." "Yes, sir. They're soaked. One of them is crying. He should have said no. Should have told James to call the police, let someone else deal with it." But something inside him stirred. A pressure behind his ribs. A whisper that hadn't spoken in years. "Hold them there. I'll come." The rain hit his skin like ice as he stepped onto the porch, the storm wrapping around him like a curse. His umbrella barely held against the wind. He descended the long path toward the gate, lit only by distant flashes of lightning. And then he saw them. 2 small figures clinging to the cold bars like shipwreck survivors. Their hair plastered to their faces, their clothes soaked through. Twin girls, maybe 6 or 7. Their eyes, wide and terrified, locked onto him. Blue. Not just blue Clara's blue. The same shade as the ocean on a clear day. The color of every dream he'd lost. "Please." One of them whispered, her lips trembling. "Our mommy. She won't wake up." Nathaniel's breath caught. It wasn't possible. His mind must have been playing tricks. "Where is she?" he demanded, heart-pounding. "In the car, over there." The girl pointed toward the line of trees that bordered the estate. She stopped moving. "We tried to wake her. I got scared. I saw your lights. What's your name?" "I'm Lila," she said. "This is Lucy. We're sorry for coming." We didn't know what else to do. He didn't answer. He just opened the gate, dropped his expensive coat over their small shoulders, and said, "Take me to her." The girls held his hands small, cold fingers pressing into his skin like they were holding on for life itself. They led him through mud, under branches, whipping in the wind, never once looking back. And there, nestled beneath a gnarled oak tree, sat a battered old sedan, its engine still ticking. One headlight shattered. The driver's door ajar. Nathaniel moved forward slowly, the girls behind him. He looked inside. A woman lay slumped against the wheel, her long, dark hair concealing her face. Raindrops pooled in her lap. Her chest rose shallowly, rhythm erratic. "Clara!" His voice barely made it past his lips. His hands trembled as he reached in, brushed the hair away. It was her. Time collapsed in on itself. Clara Whitmore. The woman he had buried. The woman whose grave he had visited. The woman who had taken his heart with her. Alive, barely. He scooped her into his arms, her skin hot with fever, her body limp like a child's. "Call ahead," he barked to James through the intercom. "Tell the clinic I'm coming. Emergency." The girls climbed into the back seat as he laid Clara gently down, wrapping her in dry blankets. The twins huddled close, touching her face, whispering her name like a prayer. Nathaniel drove like a man possessed, windshield wipers battling the downpour. Every red light felt like a betrayal. Every bump in the road a reminder that time was against them. In the rearview mirror, two little girls watched him with silent eyes. Eyes that asked a question he wasn't ready to answer. Were they, "No, not yet, don't hope. Not until you know." But the resemblance was too sharp, too perfect. He pressed the accelerator harder. When they reached the clinic, the doctors rushed Clara inside. Nathaniel stayed behind with the girls who clung to him like he was the last solid thing in their universe. "Is our mommy gonna die?" Lucy asked, voice small and shaking. "No," he said, "not tonight." "Are you a doctor?" "No. Are you our daddy?" Silence. Then thunder again. Nathaniel knelt down level with their wide eyes. "I don't know," he said, "but I'll find out, and I promise you this, I'm not going to leave you. Not now." The girls didn't speak, they just leaned into him, one on each side, and Nathaniel Cross, a man who had buried every feeling he once had, found himself holding two children he'd never met before, and crying into their wet hair like a man reborn. Somewhere above them, the storm broke into softer rain. That night, Nathaniel didn't sleep. He sat beside Clara's hospital bed, watching her breathe, flinching at every monitor beep. Down the hall, the girls slept, curled up in one hospital cot, their small hands still locked together even in dreams. And for the first time in years, Nathaniel prayed. Not just for Clara, but for answers, for second chances. For the chance to rewrite everything he thought he knew. Because grief had knocked. And behind it was family. Coming up next, what happened to Clara after her supposed death and the secrets that had been buried for nearly a decade. The truth will change everything. The sunlight filtering through the hospital blinds did nothing to warm the cold questions sitting in Nathaniel Cross's chest. Clara lay motionless, her fevered skin barely responsive to touch. Monitors beeped rhythmically, indifferent to the storm she'd endured, storms Nathaniel was only beginning to uncover. He had sat beside her all night. Once or twice Lila or Lucy had wandered in from the children's recovery room, sleep in their eyes clutching their stuffed animals. They never asked to leave. They simply needed to see that she was still breathing. So did he. That morning, as Nathaniel stepped into the hallway, Mrs. Granger arrived. The silver-haired woman carried the kind of calm that came from decades of witnessing life in its most broken forms. As the head caretaker of Magnolia Shelter, she had known Clara not as a concert pianist or lost lover, but as a mother trying desperately to survive. "She used to play," Mrs. Granger said quietly, nodding toward the hospital door. "Every Sunday after dinner on the broken upright in the shelter's common room. You'd hear Chopin echoing through cracked walls and tired souls. Most of the girls didn't know who Chopin was, but they cried anyway." Nathaniel's voice caught. "How long was she with you?" "Nearly 6 years," the woman replied, her eyes studying him. She didn't talk much about her past, just said she'd lost everything. But the way she looked at those girls, It was as if they were the only pieces of her left. He hadn't imagined the pain Clara must have endured, but he hadn't come close to understanding it either. Back at the estate, Nathaniel combed through old security footage, trying to trace moments he might have missed. He found it clear as day. 4 years ago, he'd stopped at a roadside diner outside Birmingham. He'd sat near the window, lost in spreadsheets. And just outside, a woman with 2 little girls had passed. He had looked up. For half a second, he'd stared. Long hair, pale face, familiar grace. He had shaken his head, dismissing the image as a ghost. He'd paid the bill and walked away. Now he rewound that tape again and again. The way Clara had held the twins' hands. The way she had glanced in his direction, then ducked her head. She had seen him too, but she hadn't called out. Not because she didn't love him, but because she was running. It wasn't long before the truth began to surface. Clara hadn't vanished by choice. Years ago, when she told her father, Thomas Rourke, about her engagement to Nathaniel, he had exploded. You think a man who built his empire from code and coffee can give you a future, he'd roared. Rourke wanted her to marry into old money, not new ambition. And when Clara refused, he acted. He staged a car crash, paid off medical staff, faked her death. Clara had been sedated, locked away in a private mental health facility deep in rural Alabama. Nathaniel had been told her body was beyond recognition. He had held a funeral for an empty casket, planted magnolias at a grave that held no bones. She woke weeks later, confused, trapped, her limbs weak, her memories foggy. The truth hit her like a punch. No one was coming. No one even knew she was alive, until a young nurse named Camille found the strength to help her. Camille, who had lost a sister to similar cruelty, forged papers, arranged a bus ticket, and left Clara and her unborn twins in a safe house 2 states away. Clara gave birth in a community clinic with nothing but a borrowed suitcase and a stranger's hand to hold. She named her daughters Lila and Lucy, names that had no connection to the world she once belonged to. For years she moved from place to place, cleaning motels, folding laundry, avoiding cameras. Each time she got too comfortable, someone from her past would appear, a man in a car that lingered too long, a letter with no return address. She never knew how far her father's reach extended, but she knew it was enough to destroy her girls, so she never reached out. Not even when she saw Nathaniel's face on a magazine cover or heard his name in a podcast about the richest tech founders in America. She didn't even tell the twins about him. What good was a father they could never meet? It would only make the loss more unbearable. Back in the hospital, Nathaniel stared at Clara's chart with new eyes. Malnutrition, pneumonia, dehydration. A cocktail of conditions no one should suffer, especially not someone who once graced concert halls in Vienna. How did no one find her? He whispered. James, his head of security, hesitated. Sir, there were attempts. What do you mean? 3 years ago, someone submitted a request to the company's general contact page. It mentioned Clara, said she was alive, asked for help. Nathaniel's blood ran cold. Why didn't I know it was filtered as spam? 100 messages like that come through every day. Someone flagged it as a hoax. Nathaniel sank into a chair. She had tried, and he had missed her again. All this time, while he was building his empire, she was folding sheets for minimum wage and hiding from a man they both feared. He pictured Clara alone in a shelter, telling fairy tales to 2 little girls and playing nocturnes on a piano with a broken pedal. And he cried, not with fury but with grief for the years they had lost. The lesson, perhaps, is this: love doesn't die when we bury someone, but it does fade when we let silence take over. Clara never stopped loving him, but she believed the world she left behind wouldn't love her back. Now, sitting beside her hospital bed, Nathaniel vowed that would never happen again. Outside, the sun finally broke through the clouds. The light touched her face gently. Her eyelids fluttered. And for the first time in years, Clara opened her eyes. The day Thomas Rourke walked into Nathaniel's estate unannounced, the air turned heavier than any thunderstorm ever had. He came dressed like an ambassador charcoal gray suit, perfectly shined shoes, and a cold expression that didn't flicker when he saw Clara sitting on the veranda, her daughters by her side. If the sight of her alive stunned him, he didn't show it. He walked right past her like she was just a shadow. He only stopped when Nathaniel stepped onto the marble patio, placing himself between Clara and the man who had stolen years from their lives. "I see you've resurrected," Rourke said smoothly, his voice laced with disdain. "A miracle, or perhaps a mistake." Nathaniel said nothing. "I'm here on official business," Rourke continued, setting a manila envelope on the outdoor table. "My lawyers will be filing for full custody of the twins. Clara's not fit to raise them. She's unstable, unemployed. She's been living off charity. They deserve better." Lila and Lucy, who had been drawing butterflies in chalk, looked up, confused, sensing the tension. Clara stood slowly, her hand trembling as she held onto the table for support. "You don't get to decide what they deserve?" she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Rourke didn't even glance at her. "The court will." And with that, he turned and walked away, the click of his shoes echoing like a countdown. The days that followed felt like living inside a clock winding down. Legal documents arrived. Court dates were set. Rourke's legal team, stacked with high-end litigators, sent threats through polite emails and procedural filings. Nathaniel brought in his own team, but he knew this would take more than money. They needed truth. They needed character. They needed heart. Clara was terrified. He'll twist everything she whispered to Nathaniel one night after the girls had gone to bed. He'll make it all look like I failed them. "You didn't," Nathaniel said, gripping her hand. "You kept them alive. That's more than most could have done. But the world doesn't see it that way," she whispered, "especially when he owns half of it." The courtroom was beige and quiet, but the tension was electric. The twins weren't present, Nathaniel made sure of that. But Clara sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded, her jaw clenched. Nathaniel sat beside her, his presence steadying her like a wall she could lean on. Across the room, Rourke reclined like he was watching theater. His lead attorney began with a list of accusations: Clara's years in shelters, unpaid hospital bills, missed vaccinations, one night of unpaid motel rent that led to a police report filed out of policy, not danger. They painted her as unstable, reckless, unfit. When it was their turn, Nathaniel stood. He didn't begin with evidence. He began with a story. "There was a day I thought Clara was gone forever." He told the judge, his voice quiet but unwavering. "I buried an empty coffin and built a life around silence. What I didn't know was that she was being hidden, not from the world, but from me." He then presented documents his private investigation team had compiled: false death records, hospital staff bribed by Rourke's financial shell companies, Clara's psychiatric detainment records, all obtained with names and timelines that matched Rourke's financial movements. The courtroom gasped when he revealed the final piece, a letter Clara had written from the facility addressed to Nathaniel, never delivered. But the moment that cracked everything open came unexpectedly. Amira Wells, a rising star in the public defender's office, had been assigned as a neutral children's advocate. Young, sharp, and known for her sense of integrity, she had originally been brought in by Rourke's team to appear impartial. But the week before trial, she discovered something that shifted everything. She requested permission to speak. The judge, curious, allowed it. Amira stood before the room and spoke slowly, deliberately. "I joined this case believing I was protecting two children from instability, but I uncovered something I didn't expect." She turned to look directly at Rourke. My mother was a violinist who died when I was young. She left behind a sealed box. I never opened it until this case made me wonder. Inside was a letter and a birth certificate. My birth certificate. The room froze. Amira's voice wavered only slightly. Thomas Rourke is my biological father. Clara gasped. Amira continued. He had a child out of wedlock and left my mother to raise me alone. She died believing she wasn't good enough, that he had abandoned her for status. She turned to the judge. I know what abandonment looks like, and I know what survival feels like. Clara Whitmore didn't fail her children. She saved them. She ran from the same man who once ran from me. Amira's testimony turned the tide. The courtroom was still as if holding its breath. Rourke sat rigid, his face pale. Later that afternoon, news broke that someone had leaked Clara's hospital records online, making it appear as though she had suffered a breakdown. The story trended on social media for 2 days, but Nathaniel's team fought back with grace and clarity. They released footage of Clara teaching piano at the shelter. Videos of Lila and Lucy smiling as they sang along. Statements from social workers, doctors, and even former shelter residents. They told the truth. And the truth, when spoken without shame, can be the most powerful form of defense. Clara sat beside Nathaniel one night after court, her eyes red but soft. Do you think they'll understand the girls? One day they will, he said, and when they do, they'll be proud of you. She looked at him, a half-smile trembling at the edge of her lips. You're good at this, she said, being their father. I'm just learning as I go. She reached for his hand. You're doing fine. Sometimes the courtroom isn't where justice is won. It's where scars are shown, and people are reminded that strength doesn't always look like power. It often looks like endurance. And endurance is exactly what they'd need for what came next. It happened on a Thursday morning. Nathaniel had stepped out for a call when it began faint notes drifting through the long, silent halls of the estate. At first, he thought it was the wind again, weaving its usual tricks. But then came the rising lilt, the unmistakable phrasing of Clara's left hand, a pattern only she ever played quite like that. He followed the sound. The piano room, shuttered for nearly a decade, stood open. And there she was, Clara, sitting tall but fragile, her hands trembling over the keys. Her hair hung loose down her back. Sunlight cut through the windows, casting a warm glow over the baby grand. She played slowly, carefully, as if reteaching her fingers what they once knew by heart. Beside her stood Lucy and Lila, each with one hand on her shoulder, watching their mother with awe. They weren't making a sound, as if any noise might break the spell. Nathaniel didn't move. It had been 7 years since that room held music. 7 years since that melody last filled this home with something more than grief. It was not perfect, her tempo wavered, and the high notes missed their mark, but it was real, it was alive. When Clara finished, her hands hovered in the air. She exhaled shakily. Nathaniel cleared his throat from the doorway. You opened it? He said softly. She turned, startled but not frightened. I needed to remember who I was before I disappeared. He stepped closer, not wanting to crowd her. You never disappeared from me. Not really. Clara looked at the girls. I wanted them to hear something that wasn't whispered fear, something that sounded like me. That afternoon, Lila and Lucy made a plan of their own. With the bold confidence of children who'd survived more than they should have, they decided they would perform a duet at their school's spring talent show. Mommy will play and we'll sing, Lucy explained matter-of-factly over dinner. Only happy songs. The days that followed were filled with laughter rehearsals and messes. The girls took over the piano room, turning it into a stage. Clara helped them write their own, song part lullaby, part nonsense rhyme. It didn't matter. It was theirs. But on the night before the performance, they vanished. It began with silence, then a note. It was taped to the front door, written in clipped, precise letters, "Return the girls or you'll lose everything." Panic ripped through the house. Nathaniel's security team scrambled. Police were called. Clara was inconsolable, her voice hoarse from calling their names into the empty estate. "Not again," she whispered through tears. "Please, not again." For 2 hours the house was a whirlwind of dread. Then, from the west wing came a sound. Music. Nathaniel burst into the piano room. There they were, Lila and Lucy sitting cross-legged behind the curtains, dressed in their performance outfits, surrounded by glitter and glue, and a clumsily cut cardboard banner, "Family Talent Show Tonight." They looked up, wide-eyed, not at all expecting the scene that greeted them. "We wanted it to be a surprise," Lucy said. "We left a note on the door so you wouldn't come in too early." Nathaniel stared at them, then at the note. Wrong note. Wrong door. The prank had been meant for James, the head of security, as part of their Mission Impossible game. Clara collapsed into a chair weeping, not from anger but from the sheer overwhelming release of relief. Nathaniel sank to the floor beside her, pulling both girls into his arms. In their effort to bring joy, the twins had unknowingly lit every fuse of their parents' worst fears. But even then, even in their panic, they never once thought they'd done something unforgivable. Because children don't know the weight of what parents carry. That night, after they had all calmed, Clara knelt beside the twins' beds. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Mommy got scared. I thought I had lost you." Lila reached out, touching Clara's cheek. "You can't lose us. We're home now. Sometimes love is loud, sung from rooftops, or declared in courtrooms, but other times it's soft. It's an off-key song in a living room concert. It's glitter on the piano bench. It's the sound of a mother laughing through tears." And in those quiet moments, something inside Nathaniel shifted too. He stopped waiting for the perfect time to feel safe again. Because maybe safety wasn't a place. Maybe it was a person. Or maybe it was the sound of 3 voices layered in uncertain harmony, singing a new song into a house that had long been silent. They didn't celebrate when the court ruling came through. There were no champagne flutes or loud declarations of victory. Instead, Clara stood in the quiet of her daughter's bedroom, folding their laundry with slow, reverent hands, tears sliding silently down her face. It was done. She had won full custody. Rourke had been arrested, formally charged with document tampering fraud and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. His empire, once polished and untouchable, cracked in public under the weight of Amira Wells's testimony. But for Clara, the victory wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the simple sound of her daughters giggling in the hallway. In the way Lucy tucked a daisy behind her ear and said, "I'm never leaving this house." It was in the way Lila called Nathaniel Daddy without flinching for the first time. Healing is not loud, it's slow. Like vines creeping back over burnt ground, finding life where there should be none. Nathaniel noticed the change most in Clara's eyes. There was no more flinch in her laughter, no more tension in her voice. She still had nightmares sometimes, but she no longer woke up alone. Still, there was a question neither of them had spoken aloud. What now? Would they stay here in the mansion built on memories and ghosts? Could this house really become a home? One morning, Clara answered the question in her own way. She walked through the empty guest wing, paused in front of a window, overlooking a modest patch of land, and turned to Nathaniel. "What if we didn't keep this just for ourselves?" He raised an eyebrow. "What if we made this a place for women like me, women with children? Women who ran and had nowhere to land?" Nathaniel didn't hesitate. "We build it." That fall, they began renovations. The West Wing was transformed into apartments modest, but warm, filled with light. The shelter where Clara once hid Magnolia House was reborn this time with funds music and a staff that believed in second chances. The first night the new residents arrived, Clara baked bread. Nathaniel strung fairy lights along the porch railing. Lila and Lucy handed out hand-drawn welcome cards, and a woman named Renee with a toddler on her hip and fear still in her eyes whispered to Clara, "I haven't heard my baby laugh in weeks, until today." It wasn't just charity, it was reclamation. One afternoon, Clara stood in the backyard where ashes from the old estate fireplace had been spread in the garden soil. The new roses had begun to bloom there, soft blush and brilliant gold. Amira arrived that day, too. She hadn't spoken to Rourke since her court testimony, but she didn't seem weighed down by it. She was helping now, volunteering at the legal clinic attached to the shelter. Clara handed her a cup of tea, and for a long time they just sat beneath the hanging moss, two women with separate wounds who'd chosen not to let them define everything. "I used to think I'd never forgive myself for not knowing," Amira said. "I used to think I'd never forgive myself for surviving," Clara replied. They both smiled, quiet in their understanding. It wasn't always peaceful. Trauma doesn't leave neatly. Some nights, Clara would pause mid-song, her hands frozen on the piano. Nathaniel would come beside her, not asking questions, just waiting until she was ready to play again. There were moments when the girls got sick and Clara would panic, remembering nights in emergency rooms alone. There were days when Nathaniel would catch himself staring too long, terrified that this might all still slip away, but each time they leaned in instead of out. Because that's what family is. It's not the absence of fear. It's the decision to stay anyway. One Sunday, almost a year to the day since Clara first walked back into his life, Nathaniel brought her into the garden just after sunrise. The air smelled of jasmine and fresh soil. The girls were still asleep, curled like commas in their beds. He took her hand. No speech, no dramatic overture. Just a small velvet box. Inside was the ring he had bought all those years ago, the one he never got to give her. Clara didn't speak right away. She looked at the garden around them, the house beyond it, the home they had built, not just for themselves, but for so many others. And then she said the simplest thing. "I never thought I'd get to say yes." In the months that followed, life unfolded in quieter rhythms. Piano lessons in the shelter's music room, laughter on the porch steps, Nathaniel teaching a group of teens how to build websites while Lucy proudly declared he was the smartest dad in the world. Lila asking Clara to braid her hair before the school recital and whispering, "I'm not scared anymore." In one corner of the garden, beneath the old oak tree, they placed a small stone with no name. Just 4 words carved into its surface for what was lost. Because this wasn't a story about revenge or reclamation alone. It was about roots. Roots buried, burned, and forgotten. And the quiet miracle of watching them grow again. In the heart of Savannah, Georgia, beneath the Spanish moss and the echoes of forgotten music, unfolded a story of brokenness, resilience, and extraordinary grace. Nathaniel Cross, once a reclusive tech magnate imprisoned by loss, thought his life ended the day Clara Whitmore was taken from him. He buried her memory in the marble halls of his estate, silenced every note on the piano they once shared, and sealed himself off from a world too cruel to trust. But fate had other plans. When 2 rain-drenched twin girls appeared at his gate, tiny strangers with familiar blue eyes, his world shattered again. Only this time it shattered into something he could rebuild. Those girls, Lila and Lucy, were not just orphans in need of shelter. They were his daughters, and the woman slumped behind the wheel of a broken car wasn't a stranger. It was Clara, alive wounded, and fighting to hold on to what little she had left. What followed was not a neat reunion. It was a storm of truth. Nathaniel uncovered the horrifying manipulation of Thomas Rourke, a father who used power to erase a life, separate a mother from her future, and nearly destroy a family before it had a chance to exist. Clara, once locked away and forgotten, rose with quiet strength to fight for her daughters. And in that courtroom where power so often outweighs justice, it was not wealth that won, but truth, character, and the unlikeliest of allies, Amira Wells Rourke's own abandoned daughter who chose courage over comfort. But the most powerful moments weren't those in court or headlines. They happened in a dusty piano room where Clara dared to play again, in glitter-covered posters, and a pretend talent show that almost tore them apart in fear, only to pull them closer in laughter. They happened in a garden blooming from ashes where pain was composted into purpose, and old spaces became sanctuaries for new beginnings. This is not a fairy tale. It's a reminder that healing is not always clean or fast. It's messy. It's sleepless nights and unanswered questions. It's choosing to stay when it would be easier to walk away. But when love is met with patience, when forgiveness replaces resentment, something beautiful grows. The story of Nathaniel, Clara, Lila, and Lucy teaches us that family isn't always bound by timing or perfect choices. Sometimes it's built in the ruins of heartbreak, rebuilt with each shared meal, each song played, each moment of stillness when no one runs anymore. And from this story we take a lesson, one we all need, in a world quick to judge and slow to understand. That lesson is grace. Grace to believe that people can change. Grace to forgive, even when we are justified in our anger. Grace to let go of control and let love, raw and imperfect, find its way back. Because in today's world we all carry scars, some visible, some buried. What matters is what we do with them. Do we pass the pain forward, or do we use it to lift someone else? Do we hold on to bitterness, or do we dig deep, reclaim our roots, and grow something better? So, if you're watching this and you're facing a storm of your own, know this: it's not over. No matter what's been taken from you, no matter how far you've run, love can still find you. Healing is still possible. Family chosen or rediscovered can still grow. If this story moved you even a little, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share more powerful, heartfelt stories that remind us all we're never as alone as we think we are. Thank you for watching, for feeling with us, and for being part of a community that believes in second chances. We'll see you in the next story.